Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It is your local community radio station. My name is Andy and we are broadcasting on Yagara and Turrbal country. And today on the show, we are going to be talking about something that happened this week in our local city here of Magungin, Brisbane. And that was on Monday, the Kurilpa Commons, which was a long-running community garden and political project in West End on a long disused block of land. It started in 2020. Some group of people got together to decide that they would use this land to plant a garden and to start to cultivate different relationships between people to the land and between people to each other, people with their food as well. And it's meant a lot of other things since then, as we will hear on the show today, because we're going to cover from a few different angles what the Kurilpa Commons was about, what's happened to it this week and what the community resistance looked like, and what comes next for the commoners, the people who had decided that they wanted to experiment with this different way of relating to one another and the land. And I will mention as well that it's not the only fencing off of land that's happened in our city in the last few weeks, that the Guri Camp Embassy at Burrumbin, Victoria Park, also has been fenced off. It's actually been evicted 3 times, really, in the last month. Once before they were going to organise this big weekend of protests, the council came in and removed it, as you would have heard on that day on the Paradigm Shift where we were reporting live from the site. And then a few days later, on the date when that land of Burrumbin Victoria Park, the title passed to the state government Olympic Games Association, it was then people were evicted again into a different part of the park. And then last week, another part of that park, which was not supposed to be under the title of the Olympic Committee, they were evicted from that as well, and fences put up to block that land from public use. And so we're in some kind of enclosure of the commons. If you study a kind of history, there's this time that in the sort of 16th to 18th century, with the idea of the enclosure of the commons, where land that had been held in common by people just for their own usage. Villages would be, grazing or farming on land, that it was all by the kind of rulers of the time. It was all closed off, parcelled up and sold and then held in title, and only the person who held that title could control what could happen in there. It certainly changed a lot about how people lived, and it's not likely to change as much, but here in Queensland with the state government, it does seem that there are fences going up anywhere they can, and any usage of land outside of these kind of prescribed land ownership titles is being blocked off. It seems like that's what we've seen over the last couple of weeks anyway. And so On the Kurilpa Commons, we will hear later in the show from Jess and Roshan, who are a couple of people who've been involved in the Commons. I just talked to them about the ideas behind it and what it looked like in practice. But to start off with, we will play a little story that I made on Tuesday morning, actually, and it got played on 4ZZ's current affairs show Brisbane Line on Tuesday, just to talk about what happened on that dramatic day on Monday. The last 2 days have been full of drama at the Kurilpa Commons, a much-loved community garden in West End. There have been shady government deals struck, fences erected, community rallying, 8 arrests, and a treetop resistance vigil that is still ongoing after nearly 24 hours. I spoke to Ruby Thorburn from the Kurilpa Commons to find out more.
The Kurilpa Commons is a common farm that was established during COVID, and basically the idea was to have a place in the community where people can come together and make decisions about the way that they're working together on the land, about what types of food they're growing, but also about the types of values that they want to foster together, and the types of events and things that they want in that space. So really, I think in some ways, while it's functioning as a community garden, the kind of bigger project is about direct democracy and using those gardens as a vehicle of making decisions in a different way, or kind of challenging the logic of capitalism. Yesterday, we got a notification from one of the neighbours in the morning that there had been fencing erected all around, enclosing the commons, and that there were heavy machinery on site, and that they'd started to put up permanent fencing.
It was discovered that the land the Kurilpa Commons is on had been transferred from the Department of Main Roads, who have left it vacant for over half a century, to the hands of Economic Development Queensland, a body designed to sell off government assets for private development. This, it seems, is part of an ongoing trend from the current Queensland government. On the site yesterday, it was local councillor Trina Massey. So Trina, can you tell us what's happened today?
Well, EDQ has taken over the TMR land. EDQ is selling the land to developers and to the highest bidder. And what they've done is they've decided to come in, fence it up from community, noting that this is public land. It's all about backroom deals with developers.
So it has been a campaign of yours about the state government selling off public assets, eh?
Yeah, there's been, ever since the announcement of the sell-off of the Visi site last November, the state government, there's sites across Brisbane and Northgate, down in Logan, also in the city. All of this is going to get sold off. The state government is purposely selling off public land, and they're doing it right in front of us, and we cannot let that happen. Public land belongs in public hands.
But the local community was not going to give up the Commons easily. A crowd of supporters gathered, and a group of people took their resistance to the point of physical disruption of the machines.
Hands off Kurilpa Commons!
Hands off Kurilpa Commons!
Hands off Kurilpa Commons!
Hands off Kurilpa Commons!
And so a few people got down there and tried to resist early in the morning, and they were given move-on orders. Since then, we've seen people from the nearby community coming together and rallying out the front of that fencing. And at about 1 o'clock or 1:30, we had a meeting with people who were there and decided that we wanted to resist by getting onto the land and trying to disrupt the work however possible. So we broke through the fences, climbed over them, and started walking around the commons, and some people climbed up trees and other people linked arms and tried to defend the space as best as they could.
You were one of the people in the trees, Ruby. How long did you stay up there for?
From that time till about 9 o'clock at night. Yeah, it's a full 8-hour day, and Shirai has been up there almost for, 20 hours or something. Shirai is still up there now.
And why do you think it's important that the Commons is defended?
The Commons has always been something that's needed defending because it challenges the norms and the current logic of capitalism, in that it's based on people coming together and having access to socially needed goods and a sense of connection for free, without like this kind of insane logic that's based on profit over anything else. It's been, I think since it started, it has always been under attack. We intentionally decided to break some rules from the very start, and part of that was that we wanted to challenge some of these ideas that land can be enclosed, and that it can be completely controlled by people who have nothing to do with that space or that area. And a big part of, I guess, the ongoing resistance of the Commons has been to challenge this concept of enclosure and to challenge this idea of this constant appropriation of land, the constant kind of like privatization of land and removal of people from that place. So I think in a time where people are being constantly pushed further and further out of this city particularly, but so the places where they live because of renting and the renting crisis, it's really important to have places where people can actually feel a sense of connection to a community. And I think the Kurilpa Commons, for so many people who have been there, would be able to say that it's actually one of the only places that feels like it belongs to the community. So I think it's worth fighting for, even if it's, even if it seems futile.
With one protester still in a tree nearly 24 hours later and the community still rallying outside, it does seem that no matter what, the spirit of the Kurilpa Commons will live on.
And we're going to try and fight and defend the space for as long as possible, and reconvene and strategize, but hopefully we can get enough people down there to continue. But otherwise, even if they destroy the Commons, I think what we've learned is that commoning is more than just a place. It's actually about a way of relating. And so we'll find ways to continue commoning and to continue the legacy of Kurilpa Commons.
What do we do when we love something and it's going to be destroyed?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
That is Ruby Thorburn. I was talking there, a little story that I made on Tuesday morning, not long after that the treetop resistance did end. Finally, the cops and fire brigade managed to get that person down after almost 24 hours, a totally impromptu climbing up a tree without taking supplies or warm clothes or a comfortable space to sit in, just wedged in the tree up there. An incredible effort, but a sign as well of how much that space meant to people that were involved in it. And Ruby there really pushing the fact that it wasn't just a garden, it was a political project. And I suppose there's different aspects to that. But I think one of the interesting things to start off with was that it was part of a tradition of guerrilla gardening. We all leave a physical legacy in this world. The resources that we use, the paths that we make, we do imprint it on the land around us. And sometimes the land, in other parts of the world far off, we don't see the impacts of all the things being dug out or manufactured that we use. But certainly we do have a physical interaction with this world, and it's worth thinking about what we want that to be. And guerrilla garden as well, they want their legacy to be in plants grown everywhere, whether they were given the official permission or not. And so guerrilla gardeners, it's a wonderful way of interacting with our city streets that often are not very hospitable to the non-human world of plants and animals, but it's possible to green them up a bit. And the Kurilpa Commons, when it began, was one example of that. It was, as Ruby said in the interview, it was during the COVID lockdowns. People were sort of stuck in their neighbourhoods and with a lot of time and thinking about what what could our neighbourhoods look like? And so one response was to go and plant a food garden on this unused block of land, and lots of things came from that in the last 6 years since then, including there's been a few times when the garden has been tried to be shut down under threat, and there's been community rallying to try to protect it. Of course, this week it was pretty final. They put up this fence and then they sent in the machines and just levelled the garden and all the plants in it. But it's still, as a project and as an idea, the Commons lives on. And I spoke to a couple of people who have been involved in the Commons to hear from them about what this space means. And first off, we're going to hear from Jess.
My name is Jess. I am 26 and I live in West End, and I've been going to the Kurilpa Commons for about 3 years.
Yeah, we are talking about the Kurilpa Commons, and it's been a busy week, but I'm interested first in just getting a bit of an idea more about the garden and what it meant. And so can you tell us a bit more about what is the Kurilpa Commons and what's been your involvement with it?
Yeah, sure. So the Kurilpa Commons is a space in West End down by the river that has a common farm on it. So it's like a permaculture style garden where we don't really spend any money to maintain it. All of the plants work together with the pollinators to grow, and we propagate and take cuttings and whatnot. So there's that aspect of it, which is the garden aspect, and then there's also the social aspects. So there's a number of tables there, and there's a zine library. We host weekly. It's weird speaking about it as in we host, when it's actually in past tense now, which is very sad, but we hosted working bees every Friday. And as well as that, we would host monthly crafting sessions, and on and off we hosted different events. We had a concert last year for 6 months. We had a movie screening every month, which was beautiful. It's a central hub for community to meet, connect, and I guess work together. And every working bee there would be a potluck as well. So really, not the focus. The focus isn't on gardening, but the garden is beautiful and it gets worked on.
And one of the things I heard you say recently was that you brought some kindergarten kids down to plant a tree and develop a love of gardening there.
No, that was beautiful. That was actually a year ago, basically today, because after the Commons had been bulldozed, we actually got a text asking if they can do another planting day with us with their new group of kindergarteners. So that was pretty sad, but last year a bunch of kindergarteners came in a little bus from a local kindergarten in their little bus. It was very, very cute, and we hosted a tree planting day, and we planted a guava tree, and we planted a range of herbs around it as well. And I actually noticed a couple of weeks ago the guava tree beginning to fruit, and it had its first fruit on it, and I was really excited to let them know, but I didn't realise that I needed to take a photo in that exact moment. So I'm not sure I have a photo of the fruit on it, but it was a really beautiful time. I toured the kindergarteners through the gardens, and they picked snow peas and cherry tomatoes, and they tasted herbs, and some of them were more excited to taste different herbs than others, but it was so beautiful seeing a space I love so much through the eyes of a little 4-year-old and their curiosity. Yeah,
it's one of the interesting things about the Commons and how it differs from, another community garden, which might have people can have different plots that they work on, whereas the Commons, it really was trying to, make a space that was for everybody, and everybody could harvest and things like that. That kind of bringing the community in.
Yeah. we started the Working Bees with a sort of check-in and introducing new people to the space, talking about what skills we might want to learn because everyone had different levels of what they might know about gardening. For me, when I arrived 3 years ago, knew like absolutely nothing, and had lived in apartments for the past sort of 10 years. So, and it's interesting as well watching people go through the same journey that I did, where they feel really nervous to do anything and they go, oh, I don't really know much, to feeling like they have a sense of ownership over the space and that everyone can be a part of it. And it was really magical even when I was there by myself. There would always be people sort of walking by and bumping into the space and sort of asking, oh, what's going on? And a bit of wonder and almost reservedness to pick things like they didn't deserve it because they hadn't worked on it. But being able to be like, no, it's for everyone. This food is for everyone. We're not keeping score. You don't have to do a certain amount of work. You don't have to do anything. Like, we have enough. And that was, a really beautiful part of it.
And that's, I guess there's an idea of commoning that goes beyond the garden, that it's a way of life, a way of understanding the world.
Yeah, I think there's the sense of abundance in that there is enough. There's a sense of trust in that other people are all sort of doing the best in this world and they can be trusted and things can work. We don't need to, instill work ethic or whatnot. People want to create beautiful things. And, a sense of sharing and really looking out for one another. The community that formed around it meant that, we'd help people move house. We organised like a clothing sale to fundraise for the tenants next door who were being evicted. People would check in on you if you weren't well and offer to drop off food, and there was just that sense of genuine care for one another, no matter how long you'd been involved or how many times you would come. It was really beautiful in that sense, yeah.
Now, this week, obviously, it was a pretty sad event for the Commons, but I think there was also, did bring that community together and an ability to share common grief and common resistance as well, I suppose. Can you tell us what the community response looked like? Yeah,
so it was actually a neighbour that wasn't involved in sort of the chat had contacted another neighbour and said there's machinery on site, who then was able to contact everyone, and people then got down to the site and there had been holes dug and people started filling the holes, and more people kept showing up for the space. And I think, it was just pure luck whether people got there on time. Personally, I woke up and was like, oh, it's time to go. And I know some people were away as well, but they made the commute like 2 hours or whatnot from their holiday to be there for it, because it really meant a lot to them. And I think that aspect was so clear in the fact that people were there to grieve and protect the space, but only hours later there was food down there. There was dal and rice and snacks and drinks, and there were people. I guess everyone has their own skills and things that they bring to it, and there's just that genuine sort of desire from everyone to look after one another. And sort of as the night and kind of protest went on, I actually ended up staying overnight with Shirai, who was in the tree, and a bunch of other people on the outside of the fence, sort of just kind of being there for Shirai. It was kind of like my last joyful memories in that space, because underneath, after all of the stress and the sadness, and that was all still there, there was a little bit of sleeplessness, and there was moments of singing, and there were people dropping food off throughout the night, and even in the morning, there were so many people that came and were like, I'm on my way to work, do you need anything? And someone bought baked goods, and someone came and just took a single order because one person was really craving an omelette and just went to their house and made an omelette. And another friend who was actually arrested the day before and was going to work this day came with warm oats and like individual mason jars and face fresheners. And that sense of community care is like kind of the core of it. And even when everything was sad and everything was going awful, that was still there, that really strong sense of looking out for one another and that we're all kind of together in this.
Yeah, that's amazing. And really, I guess, powerful example of what these kind of communities outside of our kind of system, what kind of beautiful things they can create that we're so often missing in our everyday lives. So what's the future look like for the Commons now? This garden's gone, but the idea of commoning, I suppose, lives on. What do you think the future looks like?
I think it's a really hard question to answer because in a world where a lot of things are just happening on social media, having a physical grounded space was so important. And there's obviously like a lot of grief of the memories in the physical space. And I think kind of processing that together before we sort of think of what next is important, even though there are people that are gearing up to go and everyone's at a different stage of sort of processing that. But so Monday and Tuesday was the fight, and so then Wednesday we were meeting again, and someone bought a beautiful homemade cake, and we all kind of sat and cried and talked together. And then Thursday, I think we all sort of spent with some special people from the Commons. Like I spent it at a friend's place. And then today we're meeting again at 3 p.m. when the normal working bee would be. And then tomorrow we're also meeting again. So there's a lot of people that are involved and there's a lot of people that care, and having all of these sort of events and spaces to not be alone but to be together and to look after one another, because, you know, when there's daily life things to do like food, it's nice to be able to do that together going forward. So I know there's a lot of love and that kind of can't be taken away, but at the same time there is a big loss and it's a lot of grief too.
All right. Thanks very much, Jess, for talking with us today.
Thanks, Andy.
On the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ, that was Jess there talking about the Kurilpa Commons. And interesting there, another element that's really brought out is it as a space for community and a space for community to show practical care and love for each other. You know, the word community gets used a lot, but it's in these processes of working together, learning about each other, that we can build the kind of community that can enable us all to thrive. And I think that gardening, it is quite a potent metaphor for understanding, I guess, how growth happens, both of us as individuals and also as communities, you know, like the work of planting and nurturing and making sure we get the good things we need, water and compost, and making sure we get rid of some of the bad things that we've inherited, some of the weeds that come in and inhibit our growth. Try to flourish as much as we can without being inhibited by some of these things that don't do us any good. And then, of course, that once plants are growing, you know, they're growing for themselves, but they're providing food for humans and other species. Big trees provide habitat as well. They're sequestering carbon into their trunks into the soil, putting out oxygen, transpiring water for rain, all these kind of things. Gardens, they are powerful metaphors for, I guess, what it is to flourish. And that's not just because they're a good literary device. That's because we are all dependent on the food that comes out of our soil, you know. That's what, there's no other plan B for humans, even eating meat. It's like those animals are eating the plants. And so we exist as part of an ecosystem, and looking after the soil, the plants, our ecosystems, our atmosphere is looking after ourselves and the people around us as well. And so I think gardening is a great activity and a great way of, thinking about what it means to live a flourishing life, a good life. And it's a lot of gardening has happened on this site, the Kurilpa Commons, over the last 6 years. It did get all fenced off and bulldozed this week by the Queensland State Government, as we have heard in the interviews with Ruby and Jess so far. And I have one more interview about the Commons and what it means with Roshan. So let's have a listen to that.
Hey Andy, this is Roshan from Kurilpa Commons.
And it has been a bit of a hectic week at the Kurilpa Commons.
It has been a really big, devastating time there. And want to acknowledge too that it's also coincided with as well further enclosure of Barambin as well. Yeah, more fences going up there on the same day that the state gov was putting up fences around the Kurilpa Common farm on Monday. Yeah, it started about 8 a.m. in the morning. We didn't have any kind of notice. There's plenty of opportunities and ways that we could have been contacted. There were signs up around the place with email addresses, and there's a really regular, consistent presence of folks who are, engaged with that space.
Can you tell us a bit about the Commons and your involvement with it?
Myself and some other folks in the last few years have been approaching being in relation to that place through a framework of commoning, which I guess we articulate in the garden through 3 principles. The first one being that no one owns the garden, the second one being that the food is free, and the third one being that mistakes are welcome. That first one, no one owns the garden, is obviously in direct opposition to the state government's claim over the land. Previously, it had been claiming management of the land through the Department of Transport and Main Roads, with the purpose of maybe putting a bridge across the Maiwa there one day. And our understanding is that most recently, TMR transferred management or ownership of that land to this body called EDQ, or Economic Development Queensland. Our common farm there is premised on a rejection of the authority of the state to claim that land, and instead to recognise the ongoing sovereignty of the Agro and Turrbal people in the Kurilpa Peninsula, and to practice a more custodial relationship to land that's not based on possession or ownership, but instead is based around responsibility and community building.
So it's interesting because there's this really broad philosophical idea, and then there's the practice of very small, pulling out one weed at a time, or planting one plant, or turning the compost or whatever. How do the two relate, this broader philosophy and the practice of trying to be a custodian of this land and make it fruitful?
Yeah, I think they relate. I think about the third principle, mistakes are welcome. There's that understanding that we're coming together and being in a relationship with land without starting from a place of being in right relation, or at least speaking for myself, as a white settler in this place. And that is always inevitably going to be place-based and specific and relational, and is always going to be something that's evolving and that is contingent upon the relationships particular to any specific place. And what does that look like in terms of an approach to gardening? Well, it looks like a bit of understanding that everyone's got something to offer, and understanding that there's wonderful potential for people to learn from each other. There's always such a joy to come to the garden and find someone planting something cool, like some kind of cool vegetable that I was unfamiliar with or I didn't know about, and then being able to learn and grow and do sort of knowledge exchange together. That was a really beautiful part of it.
So I guess this week, it's been a bit of a sad event with the state government, who obviously their concern is not with, custodianship of land, fencing it off and levelling it. You've linked it to Burrumbin there as well, and I guess one of the phrases that the Commons often uses is enclosure, this sort of the opposite of commoning and a kind of historical idea. Do you want to talk about enclosure and I guess how it relates to what we've seen this week?
Yeah, well, I guess my understanding is largely from learning that's happened around the Commons farm, and I've had reading groups in the past, reading the work of like Silvia Federici, and Federici's work will talk about the enclosure of the Commons, and also new forms of enclosure and new forms of commons as well. But I guess, my understanding is thinking about the ways in which land is commodified and privatized and quite literally enclosed through the construction of fences, and in that way is converted from a communal space or a community space, and a space where the relations can be shaped by people's direct relationships with each other, and is then something that has the capacity to produce accountability and responsibility to each other, and is instead converted into private property under the sensible ownership of, so-called landowner or developer or corporation or state body who doesn't have a relationship to the people or place that constitute that space.
And I guess the mediation of that relationship is money. Like, money takes the place of those human relationships.
Yeah, totally. It becomes a system that's, based around colonial capitalism instead of a system that's more grounded in a set of social relations that are emergent and, sort of like I was alluding to earlier, are always going to be messy, but also beautiful in the sense that they're relational and always emergent.
All right. Well, Roshan, I guess the idea of the Commons was always about more than one garden, and there is still another growing forward garden surviving. But I guess, what do you think, what does the future look like for the group of you that have been involved in the Kurilpa Commons?
Yeah, no, it's a definitely like a big loss. The closed out of access to that land and to see the common farm destroyed. And there is the Dutton Park farm, and there is the relationships that we've built with each other and the ways of relating to, not only each other, but land and community building as well, that will continue to find seed and fruit elsewhere, and that might look like more common farms, that might look like more gardens, that might look like food stuff, but I guess it's a set of principles and ways of relating that transposed into like a broader political project or a more sort of like holistic or something way of trying to move through the world.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Roshan, for chatting with us today.
Hey, no worries, Andy.
You are listening to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ. We were speaking with Roshan from the Kurilpa Common about largely about the philosophy of that space and what it means, what it's trying to do in a broader sense than gardening, although gardening is a good activity too. And it was a big loss, the bulldozing of that space, but in some ways it's too symbolic of, our society's priorities and values, that this block of land, that the government will sell it to a private developer, no doubt, and gain some money from it, but they're totally blind to all the possibilities of what could be done with it. Where the Commons are talking about a whole different way of people relating to the space in their neighbourhood, relating to each other. But so often our society has tunnel vision and all they see is dollar signs. We are just about out of time, but I do want to mention one last thing. Before, actually, I think the involvement of Jess and Roshan, who we spoke to today, the Commons had actually coincided the beginning in largely with the protests outside the Kangaroo Point detention centre, where a bunch of refugees who had been held offshore for close to a decade, and there was protests outside of there trying to get them released. It was an incredible movement and time, and it was successful in the end in getting them released, at least on temporary visas, and then settled in a lot of cases overseas in other countries. Now, a lot of those refugees, once they came and worked in the Commons, which was an amazing, nourishing thing for people who had been locked up inside for too long. And a lot of the food was distributed to the places where they were living. One of those refugees has just passed away, Jalal Mahamid. Jalal had been through a lot in his life, but was a lovely person as well as a talented artist and poet. Very sad for a lot of those people, and a double loss this week for a lot of the people who were involved in the Commons in those early days. There's a lot of suffering and grief in the world, but a lot of possibility to make positive change, even just by starting where we are. So I'll see you next week.